I just want to touch on a couple of key themes, I guess. One is schools. There's about $200 million a year invested in schools across the country and in our First Nation communities. You may recall under Canada's Economic Action Plan from 2009 to 2011, there was about $175 million there. And really, it was a small package of school projects at the time, but significant. So 12 major renovations or new builds. The last budget, 2012, actually had another targeted amount, $175 million as well. But this time, the government gave us new direction. There was going to be work on 3 previously announced school projects at Fort Severn and Pikangikum in Ontario and Shinattawa in Manitoba. So those 3 had already either had been started in the feasibility or design, and currently Fort Severn is almost on feasibility. Shinattawa is in construction, and Pikangikum likely will come forward this year. The second group, if you will, was to provide substantial completion funding support for 5 more schools. Again, at the top of the national priority list, and that spans the entire length of the country as well. And then there was a third piece, I guess, a $50 million investment to leverage First Nation and industry partnership proposals to bundle projects, and that's an exercise we're conducting with Northern Manitoba First Nations as well. So there's some P3 involvement there, which is again somewhat new to school procurement in the country. So what that does is it sort of opens up some of the thinking and really challenges industry and government partners to look at innovative ways to procuring new schools on reserve. There's also significant investments in water and wastewater. I think over the last 7 years there's about $3 billion there, and some of you may have heard about the results of the National Assessment on Water and Wastewater 2 years ago. That was announced in Saskatoon. Well, since that time, the government, and in particular the department ourselves, we're focusing on building up capacity in First Nation communities, assisting operators, assisting maintainers, albeit at the same time investing in critical infrastructure on reserve, because we found that communities were asking for help on the education and on the capacity building. So there's a lot of stock and a lot of time and a lot of investment, time and money in those particular areas. Housing, I know we have some folks from CMHC here as well. The department continues to invest about $150 million a year. I know there's some significant discussion in Ottawa about the roles, responsibilities, respectively, of CMHC and Aboriginal Affairs. That's continuing. And I know that this is one of the major areas for conversation always when chiefs come to Ottawa and discuss their infrastructure needs. But I just thought I'd mention to you where we are in the department currently. Policies are dated, and I know that strategically there's been significant conversation, both CMHC, our department, and AFN on what the future might be. And I would expect that those conversations are going to continue early into the new fiscal year as well. Give you some rough idea about funding averages. There's about 1,750 new units and 3,100 renovations annually in First Nation communities, as well as social housing. So that's the Aboriginal Affairs component, and CMHC certainly invests differently as well. And finally, I guess some of the other emerging needs, interestingly enough, center around new regulations, Environment Canada regulations around fuel tanks. So we had gone to the centre within the department, and there's about $80 million now allocated over 5 years to assist First Nation communities to ensure that their critical infrastructure tanks, fuel tanks, are upgraded to meet the new environmental regulations from 2008. EC passed the storage tank systems for petroleum products, and that applies all across the country, and especially on in our First Nation communities. So there's been a fair bit of work identifying what those critical tanks were, and it's especially challenging in our off-grid communities, our communities in northern Manitoba and northern Ontario that are serviced only by winter roads, because it takes sometimes 2 or 3 years to effect a solution there. So I thought I'd give you that as a highlight of some of the areas of focus for us over the next while. And I thank you again for inviting me, and I'll certainly be around for the rest of the day. If you want to come up afterwards and ask me questions, I'd be certainly happy to engage. Thanks again, Nakamik. Merci.